Hey, good morning, everybody. I am here to talk to you about what is going on at Edmonton's real estate market. And it is interesting because Edmonton is finally starting to see some warmer weather. When I say warmer, I actually looked at the forecast and I'm so excited that it's going to be over 20 degrees next week. And we're just shooting right into spring, summer type weather. It's been so cold. And I do wonder, I was looking at some of my older posts from 4 or 5 years ago when the weather started to turn, how the market started to turn as well. So, am I a weather person or am I a realtor? I'll tell you, sometimes it feels like they're really tied together is the weather and the real estate market. So it doesn't matter what the weather is, your personal life situation changes all the time, right? So if you are happening to be purchasing in this market versus another one, people are asking if it's a good time to sell or buy. And the question I'm going to ask you is, what are you needing to do? The best time to sell and buy is when you have to sell and buy. If you're just kind of playing around with the idea and experimenting and seeing if this might be something, maybe it's not the right time for that because when the market was hot, that was the time to experiment. Market is not like it was last year. So let's start in. Currently, there are 2,800 listings in Edmonton, and there are just like that was just from last week. We had 2,731. So it's gone up a little bit, and we're seeing the inventory start to slowly climb up. And why is that? Now, we're still very low in inventory, but the reason we're starting to see it climb up, in my opinion, is there's a lot of sellers that still think their house is worth what it should have been worth last year at this time. And the market started to turn, and you'll see this in the market stats that we're going to talk about in a second here. The market started to turn around now ish. It started to switch and change to slower. And from May until December, things took a drastic turn from the first 4 months of our real estate market last year, which had overinflated prices and a huge demand because of the low interest rates. Now we are looking at, yes, the interest rates are higher. They have stabilized now. We haven't seen an increase in the last couple months, and we don't expect it to continue to increase. And the listing inventory is starting to slowly creep up because it is spring. People are starting to put their homes on the market and they're not selling as quickly, I think, as most people have anticipated. In St. Albert, you've got 178 from last week, 182, and Sherwood Park, 84 versus 86, and 180 in Spruce Grove. St. Albert and Sherwood Park have stayed pretty consistent. Spruce Grove, that market, interestingly enough, when I talked to you about the sold, is already taking on last year's market and what Spruce Grove looked like. In Edmonton and St. Albert and Sherwood Park, we're starting to catch up. Now, Sherwood Park, I'll just make a note, has always been really strong. They have very low inventory, 84 properties. It's always hard to find a place, and it's still very competitive. So what that means is if there's low amount of inventory and high demand, which Sherwood Park is always high demand, you still got a pretty strong seller's market, especially depending on if the prices are right. Now, if you have any questions and you're watching, please pop them in the comments because I can actually see them and I'll pop them into our feed here to answer the questions for anybody that might want to see. Pending sales in Edmonton in the last week, 491 versus 489. So my take on that too is we're starting to see pending deals not be 5 days. They're now maybe 10 business days or 2 weeks. So what we're seeing is last week's numbers is going to be the same as this week's numbers because they're probably still pending from the week before. So we're not seeing what that I'm saying is not a whole lot of deals got written in the last week. That's my assessment. Obviously, some pending sales went sold, they would have come off, but there's now new people who have written offers, nothing where it's spiked up. If you saw a big spike in there, you could see a huge demand that is increasing, but we are not seeing that. St. Albert 35 versus 28 last week. So you can see there's a little bit, they had more new offers written than ones being removed or still being on the market. And Sherwood Park 36, 34 is pretty similar, nothing too drastic there. Spruce Grove 22 to 33. So you're seeing a drop in what we saw last week. So last week we had 33, 22 means that we probably didn't see a whole lot of new offers, probably very minimal being written in Spruce Grove. So the Spruce Grove market definitely quieter than the rest of its counterparts. The market in terms of sold in the last 7 days. So this is now the conditions have been lifted. In this market, we're not seeing a lot of offers being written just completely unconditional where they go sold. So they go pending, due diligence, 5 to 7 days, 10 days, then sold and get lifted. The last 7 days, 209 properties sold in Edmonton versus 187 last week. So you're seeing a little bit more sold activity, but it's basically leftover activity from the week before when it was pending. In St. Albert, 24 versus 20, Stewart Park, 17-19, and then Spruce Grove, 25-24. So those sold in the last week in both St. Albert, Stewart Park, and Spruce Grove. Nothing drastic, very typical. Like I said, the new offers being written is pending sales, and that's where we need to look. And Edmonton just slightly higher, just by 2 deals last week, and the biggest change was really St. Albert going higher. So we're seeing more sales in St. Albert. So if you have a house in St. Albert, you might want to think about that. Now, compared to last year, the 7 days of activity. So let's talk, like, 209 sold this last week period versus 308 last year. So you can see there was still a higher demand. Things were moving a lot, like the more volume, but you're seeing the gap starting to close because it's not as drastic as it was earlier this year. St. Albert, 24 versus 39. So they're pretty close. Sherwood Park is 17 versus 30. So there was a lot more activity in Sherwood Park, a lot more sold. And then in Spruce Grove, 25 versus 32. So Spruce Grove and Sherwood Park have a bigger drastic difference. St. Albert also, like, it's still a pretty drastic, but you can see the gap is closing. And I'll predict you this: in the next month, in May and June, it's probably going to close even more. I think in June, we may be very similar to what we were looking like last year, because this year's market is very, it reminds me a lot of what was happening in the fall. We were talking amongst our peers about how this real estate market doesn't seem as urgent as normal spring markets. And I'm not talking compared to last year. I'm just talking about spring markets in general. Prior to our pandemic, spring market tends to be very, like, busy. People are out, they're shopping, they're excited. But we're seeing a very big difference this year. So it's interesting because people are still waiting for rates to stabilize. They're still waiting for the prices to drop, interest rates to drop. But the interest rates are dropping, but maybe by 0.5%, not a whole lot. So I think it's just more of the psychology of when buyers are actually ready to accept what their money is able to buy them, and what sellers are realizing that the market's going to give them their price. I know that they want more, but the longer it sits, our market isn't, it's actually declining. And what does that mean? If you price your house up here and the value is here, and you wait 30 days to make that adjustment, the price, you think, okay, I'm going to get here, then I'll sell it because I'm not in a rush. The price has dropped. So now that you've made that adjustment, the value is back down here. So you have to be really careful in this market. We're definitely not in an inclining market. We are definitely, I say, more stable, if not declining. Um, so, and I'm just going to post here. Brad just talked about good comparison to fall 2021. Yeah, it definitely feels like it is more of a fall market. And I'm still waiting for the spring market to kind of kick into place where we see that higher activity level. And I think we're seeing a lot of apprehension from both sides, from both buyer and seller sides. Sellers are refinancing and thinking, I'm not going to move up. I'm just going to stay put where I am because the interest rates are higher. And so my costs are higher. And if I upgrade, I'm going to pay even more money. So like I said at the beginning of this broadcast, it is easier to look at where you're at in your situation in terms of what should be determining your move. Are you moving because your house is too small? Are you moving because you need to downsize? Look at those factors. Don't look at, is it the right time to sell because the interest rates are low and whatnot. You got to look at what works for your family, and then how do we maximize and find the best fit for you when it comes to that. So if you have any other questions, pop them in the chat. I'm happy to, get back to you. We will talk again next week about what's been going on. And I hope that I can report more sales, more pending deals being written. But Edmonton is just going to keep on going, and go Oilers, go.